This is Powered by Learning, a podcast designed for learning leaders to hear the latest approaches to creating learning experiences that engage learners and achieve improved performance for individuals and organizations.
Powered by Learning is brought to you by DaVinci Interactive. For more than 25 years, DaVinci has provided custom learning solutions to government agencies, corporations, medical education and certification organizations, and educational content providers. We collaborate with our clients to bring order and clarity to content and technology. Learn more at davinci.com.
Hello and welcome to Powered by Learning. I'm your host, Susan Court, and today I'm joined by DaVinci CEO Luke Kempski, who's going to talk to our guest, Craig Joyner, Senior Vice President, Brand Experience at Fulcrum Labs. Fulcrum Labs has developed a 3.0 adaptive learning platform and has helped partners from both enterprise and higher education achieve their goals. Welcome, Craig.
Hi, how you doing, Susan?
Yeah, great welcome, Craig. I'm so glad you could join us this morning.
Thank you, Luke. It's great to be here. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts now and very insightful, both on the questions and the answers provided a lot of additional clarity and perspective for me.
Well, good. Well, thank you. We're going to ask you to do the same today. So let's start out telling us a little bit about your role at Fulcrum Labs.
I am Senior Vice President of Brand Experience, and I work hand in hand with our Client Success Director. Fulcrum is a very outcomes-driven company, and so these two roles work very closely to make sure that we're delivering for our partners on what their main KPIs are, and also in sort of translating that into marketing materials or engagement materials, and just all around thinking of new ways. There's always, with learning, there's always new challenges, and sometimes we even step a little beyond what you would consider a traditional SaaS adaptive platform role, and that's sort of where I help fill in.
That makes sense, Craig. I think this is that adaptive learning is such an interesting topic, and one you hear talked about a lot in theory, but you don't always get like concrete examples or practices. Can you start by giving me your definition of adaptive learning and how that applies to what you do at Fulcrum Labs?
I can. Thanks, Luke. This is a good question. And over time, we've seen sort of people's understanding evolve. So I'll sort of take it from the most general level. The real general idea is that adaptive learning, and this is pretty simple. The idea is obviously to maximize the impact and efficiency of learning. And it's really by having the training adjust to the individual learner's needs. At Fulcrum, we think of adaptive learning as basically an extremely high-tech version of a one-on-one coach. That's a very visual concept, right? We've all experienced a one-on-one coach, and we've all sort of experienced the benefits of having that personalization. Where the definition of adaptive gets more complex really is in the ways that different adaptive platforms adapt and why they adapt, right? What those decisions are and what data goes into those decisions on how it adapts. Obviously, I can't speak a lot for other providers, but for Fulcrum, one of the main goals of adaptivity is simply to achieve optimal challenge, really that learning sweet spot for each learner that's just above their current capability, to maximize that application level mastery and to boost their confidence in these new skills. And really, it all comes down to what I say all the time, which is so that people can apply these skills back on the job. This isn't just theoretical knowledge. I'd also like to mention that while adaptive is really this critical component in achieving great training results and reducing training times, it's really just part of what an adaptive platform like Fulcrum is all about and why they're so successful. Adaptivity, while it's very powerful, when you combine it with other things like microlearning or competency-based approach or data analytics, learner choice, any of these things, that's really where you start to see the dramatic results in terms of learning outcomes and also the learner experience, which, as you know, is key to engagement. So when you're combining those things, it really is that 1 + 1 + 1, equals 10. You really get this. Adaptivity is sort of the hot thing right now that people want to talk about because they've seen the results and they understand the benefit of that idea of like a one-on-one coach. But really, it's the combination of these other elements that really make it the most powerful.
Yeah, and that definitely is what's kind of most interesting about it, is how different aspects of learning and some of the current approaches to learning are overlapping with this whole idea of adaptive learning. It would be great if you could zoom in on an example of how adaptive learning can apply, like in an enterprise setting.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is, we talked about something very topical right now is companies are seeing a significant amount of turnover, right? I'm sure you've heard it as well. So obviously having their advantages to be able to get your employees trained up, both in terms of speed, but also getting them on the job. And something that we talk about, which is what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have training and check the box. You don't want people to go on the job and be, as we say, sort of faking it till they make it, where they're out there really kind of making mistakes. And, obviously there's some situations are more critical than others. We often talk about, people ask me like, what does Fulcrum specialize in? And I said, well, if the idea of people in your company faking it till they make it just scares the hell out of you and you can't sleep at night because of that, then we're probably someone that you should be talking to. Yes, for a specific example, one of them is onboarding, right? And again, very topical. We're seeing a lot of turnover. We've heard terms like the Great Resignation. A lot of people, because of the pandemic, are sort of reevaluating life and moving around, taking different jobs, having different criteria. And so onboarding is very important. One of the partners that we work with, really high turnover rate in the 80% range. And they're sort of the skills that people were applying were critical and in some cases dangerous. So they began using it for onboarding. And what they saw, the way that they were sort of measuring, we always talk about, we want to make sure that they have success. In this case, they were measuring equipment damage as their primary KPI for if these people were actually applying the training on the job. And what we saw with the training delivered in Fulcrum's platform is they told us within the first year, they had reduced accidents by almost 60%. When we heard that, it was almost too much. It's like, oh, people aren't going to believe us. Again, this is sort of the partner's number. We were astounded by that. And they said they had 3 months during the year where there were 0 accidents. This was incredible for them in terms of cost savings and workers' comp that they were having to pay when equipment was damaged and things like that.
In that case, Craig, can you talk about like what was the learning experience? Like how did the learning actually adapt without getting into like really technically, if it's in a manufacturing environment, for instance, how does the learning adapt to the learner?
One of the things that adaptive is really good at is not penalizing people who come in with pre-existing knowledge. And we see this with onboarding time after time. It's like you might have someone who's just coming into the field for the first time, right? This is their first job. So they basically need everything. All your skill set. Then you have other people who might have changed companies, right? And they're coming into your company from another company. And so onboarding is very different for them. And what those people specifically talk about is they say, I love that you didn't penalize me for the things I already knew, that the system allowed me to test out of areas. That's a common theme too, testing out. The adaptive allows you to test out again at application level mastery. It allows you to test out and very quickly move through the training. And then the people who didn't know anything, they said, I felt very supported. I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. And, again, we see that in the data. People come in, they don't have any existing knowledge. They make a lot of mistakes. The system is delivering at the optimal challenge. So the whole time they feel confident. They never lose confidence. Like they always think, I can do this. Because it's not, for example, serving them content that's difficult and then serving them even harder content, right? It's understanding, it's mapping both their performance in the course, but also their behaviors. And it's making suggestions to them. And that's something that they say, oh, I loved it. The other thing that people talk about, you talk about how is this for the learner? They talk about how the platform, they say it put me in the driver's seat. It's funny because the learner doesn't necessarily talk about the adaptivity in that sort of a way. They talk about sort of the experience. And that's, I love that it put me in the driver's seat is something we hear a lot of.
Oh, that's great. I know that adaptive learning in terms of how it's evolved over time, what we talked about 5 years ago or even longer ago about adaptive learning is different than what the evolution of technology and the use of data and other things coming along that have really influenced. And I know at Fulcrum, you talk about adaptive learning 3.0. Can you give us kind of a brief history of the prior versions and leading to what's new about it today?
I can, and we have had sort of a front row seat to that because we've, these aren't just versions. This is literally the experience that Fulcrum went through developing. When we started out, adaptivity was really about sort of branching, very basic branching. And in a lot of cases, we were a little more advanced, but the most basic branching being someone went in at the very beginning, gave some input, and then a pathway was sort of projected for them that they went on, right? And there was no further adaptivity beyond that, right? We started to evolve, and there was a little more various points along the learning education in Adaptive 1.0, where it was also further branching. That was really the beginning for us, and for a lot of adaptive platforms as well. What we started to see in the next level of sophistication of Adaptive 2.0 was the use of algorithms. It's like, okay, we could write these algorithms, we could put these things in place, and it could adjust a little, in a much more detailed way, right? We could, along the way, people could be their pathway could be adjusted, and that was great. That got us a long way until we realized, well, the systems should be learning, right? And in comes, Adaptive 3.0, which is really taking advantage of artificial intelligence and having the system learn, right, from what is successful, what's not successful, and really optimizing that. And the accuracy, what you get with the AI, the ML complement in Adaptive 3.0 is you get the ability to more accurately deliver exactly at the person's need. Again, more to that optimal challenge.
And how would that apply in the situation we were talking about before in terms of the onboarding at the 3.0 level where the system is actually learning? Can you give an example of that?
I can actually give two quick examples. So the system is learning and adjusting. And one of the ways I'll give an example is the system is also, the AI is going through and not only evaluating what to deliver to the individual learner, it's actually identifying how well the course is performing and giving us analysis, very actionable analysis. It's actually flagging content areas that are problematic. And what we've seen is that when we go in, we've adjusted these problematic areas, we've seen something really interesting. As you would expect, what we saw in this onboarding scenario, we saw an increase in performance in those areas where the content wasn't performing well. But what we additionally saw that is more interesting and also very powerful extension, we saw performance in the whole course increase. So for example, if we identified a few problem areas and we fixed those areas, we saw overall course performance go up. So that what it's sort of proving is that when people have these experiences and it's not great, it's not optimal, people are underperforming in other areas of content. You go into a new section, you might be, let's say you're in hydraulics, and all of a sudden you move into another section that's on weights and balance or some completely different subject. The underperformance of the one content is bleeding into the other. Being able to fix those things, and also the other thing that you see is the instructional designer gets smarter. They start to learn how to craft better questions because they're seeing actionable analysis and they can A/B the content that they've edited.
I'm glad you pointed out the instructional designer impact. I think that would be a good place to go next. When a lot of our listeners to Powered by Learning are involved in the development of learning experiences, how do they have to change in their approach to developing learning experiences based on having an adaptive platform at their fingertips?
That's a great question. And obviously part of that depends on sort of where they're coming from, right? I mean, for example, we're based on a microlearning sort of framework. All the studies have shown that microlearning increases performance. So if you're already, if you come from a microlearning, it's the transition into a Fulcrum platform is even smoother. Obviously, if you're not microlearning, well, I would suggest you start doing that anyway, because all the studies are showing that that's the most effective way to deliver training. A lot of it has to do with when I talk to instructional designers, what I get a lot of is a lot of myth. Right? You talk to them and they say, "Oh, I'm hesitant. I love the idea of adaptive learning, but I don't want to give up. Craig, I love Storyline 360, or I love Rise, or I love this simulation tool that I've been using, and I'm not interested in." And that's just a myth that's out there. that's not, with Fulcrum's platform, we have the benefit that we were originally also had a content division. And so the fact that our content team of like 40 people was working with our tech team, we were really building a CMS and a design system that accommodated and we had feedback all the time. And so we built a system that can accommodate any of that. Although people often come to us, they don't think that at first. The other thing is, it's actually building a course in our adaptive platform is actually a lot more similar to a traditional building a traditional e-learning course than people think. I think another myth that's out there is people think, oh, I have to think of all these pathways and all it's adaptive, so I must be thinking of all this schematic of all these pathways that could happen, and that's really not the case. You build a fairly traditional style, and then the system is really what takes care of all that. So that often comes as both a huge surprise and a huge relief to people when we talk to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like the real key to it is to think in terms of small chunks, in terms of microlearning, so that the system can pull in what's needed to adapt based on those learning elements or those learning objects or those microlearning pieces, however you want to refer to them.
Exactly. And we're pushing people toward, we're achieving application level mastery. And part of the way that we do that as well is also we're based on a Bloom system, right? So we're pushing people towards application analyze level.
Excellent. So adaptive learning makes a lot of sense. It still hasn't penetrated a lot of organizations, I guess, in their approach to learning. What do you think gets in the way of that?
It's, a lot of it is back to the myths. 9 years ago, when people were like, adaptive, what's that? And we would have to really explain, like, here's what adaptive is. And over the years, what we've seen is, now there's more interest in it. People have seen, there's been enough time where there are results out there. But there are a lot of different platforms that are out there or have been out there, are no longer out there, but sort of put a lot of ideas out in the workspace. So it's really just about educating people on the differences, right? And I think people come to it sometimes with dated ideas. We talked about adaptive 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and sometimes people come to us and they have their concept of sort of adaptive is more of a 1.0 or a 2.0 thought, right? So they're like, well, it sounds pretty good, which 1.0 and 2.0 were pretty good, right, for the time, right? And so we have to sort of get them up to speed on what the latest and greatest, and usually what perks people's ears is, would it be valuable for you to be able to objectively measure the results of your training? And that usually gets a lot of heads nodding, right? I mean, we've always been challenged, and most of the people we start out with are at the level of surveys, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if you could take it another step farther in terms of that value to the organization, and maybe talk about if there was, for instance, like a large health system with lots of employees, multiple facilities, multiple locations, defined roles, but a lot of variations in roles. Where would having an adaptive learning platform bring value in that scenario?
Well, I'd start off with, when you start talking about a health system, I go back to what I said earlier, which is, that sounds like not a good fake it till you make it scenario.
There you go.
People, whether people's lives are at risk here, right? It's like, these are situations where, on the clinical side, these are situations where you want people to do the training. The first time they apply that skill on the job, it needs to be accurate, right? The big value of Fulcrum is application level mastery, right? And we achieve that two things. One is we get people to application level mastery. The other thing that is part of Fulcrum's mission is helping turn these people into confident subject matter masters, right? It's giving people the confidence. Adaptive, it can be really powerful in terms of giving people confidence. Again, because it's adjusting. I mean, think of when you're at the gym and you have a trainer, right, working with you, and they're pushing you at optimal challenge, and they're not going to get you hurt, right? They're not going. They know your limits of your body better than you do, and that's the way the system is as well. They understand very quickly. They understand how you learn better than how your understanding of how you learn. And so it's able to get in there and get you to that, right? Deliver the content to you sort of at your, just above that level, the appropriate level for you. And it really maximizes your efficiency, gets your confidence high, because you need to have that confidence to apply things. I mean, what we see traditionally is when people have skill set, but they don't have confidence, they can have a tendency to go back to some old bad habits, right? What we really give a health system like that is we give application level mastery, we give confidence, we give people, objective, measurable data on the results, and that's in terms of how their learners are performing. Then they have the confidence due to data that the course is performing well, because the analytics, again, the AI is going through and flagging any content areas that are underperforming, and they're able to adjust those, basically instantaneously push those live, track those versions, track the performance of the content, A, B, the content, and see how it's doing, fully optimize that course. For a lot of, like in a health system, compliance is a big deal. So what you have in that case is, it's training that you have to legally deliver every year, 18 months or whatever. So you can be, every time that's going through, it's optimize, getting better and better and better. What Adaptive provides for those people, who are going through compliance, is if they know the material because they've taken it last year and they know it and they're applying it, boom, they test out of it. They don't have to consume that content. It helps get them through quicker. And time is obviously money, whether you're an accounting firm or whether you're a hospital, time is still money. And then the other thing it does for the organization is we want people to be lifelong learners. And any L&D department, healthcare being no different, has a lot of training that they need to deliver. And the more that your employees respect your training, because your training respects them, the greater the buy-in. We don't want to have everything be mandatory, right? We're going to have some learning programs that are voluntary. And the way that we get engagement is we show people those things are relevant, and forcing people to do things that they already know teaches them the opposite, right? The way that we encourage a culture of learning is by offering these meaningful learning experiences. Does that help give you some color on a health system?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, you can start to see how this adaptive learning 3.0 combined with AI and machine learning can really has the potential to be revolutionary in how we distribute learning in an enterprise like a health system. Mm-hmm. I think it also could be a bit overwhelming for a learning leader in terms of, like, if they're not currently, haven't done anything yet that would be deemed adaptive, or haven't implemented any aspects of adaptive learning, like where should they start?
MVP, what they talk about all the time in the tech world is minimum viable product, right? It's like, don't think you have to take on something huge, right? The most important thing, you do a pilot. You see if it works, you test it. And the way that you do that, I would say there's two criteria. It's like, pick something small. They say the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Well, you pick something that's bite-sized, and what we've seen, we've worked in particular, with a healthcare provider on something small. And by that, I mean, it might be between 6 and 12 learning objectives. That you don't need a whole lot. 6 and 12 learning objectives could be like, I don't know, half hour to an hour course, depending on people's knowledge. And you try it. You don't hook it into anything else. You let the platform be a standalone and you try it. The most important thing is picking something, though, that's going to be meaningful, so that when you see these results, it's meaningful to you. And the other thing is, when you go into it, you really need to set your, and this is something we work with on our partners, you really need to set your KPIs to know what you're shooting for, right? So that you're really kind of rock solid, and you do something small, let it prove itself. Our biggest marketing tool is pilots. When people do a pilot, people sign up.
Mm-hmm. Now, that makes complete sense. I know that we've seen clients do a really great job at being able to embrace that pilot approach and take a base level learning objective that needs to be achieved across a number of different audiences or learning groups within their organization, and really have a big impact with that. And it sounds like something like that would be a really good first topic for you.
Absolutely. And the other thing that people really like is sometimes when they go in, people say, Craig, that first part you mentioned, the part about picking something meaningful, they say to us, we don't know. We don't know what it is. And fair enough, our tool can be used for needs analysis, a very efficient adaptive needs analysis. So if you want to or you need to start there, that's a great way to go as well. List out skills that you think are important. Let's put people through and let's see where they are. The benefit of adaptive, if the system sees that they don't have some critical, again, it's going towards application level mastery. If the system sees, hey, these people don't have application level mastery in this component of this skill, it doesn't bother with the rest of the questions, right? It's like, okay, that person's going to need to be trained on that because they don't have the complete set, right? And so it'll throw out scores of questions related to that specific skill. It's like, okay, that person needs training. Let's just flag them as they're going to need this training. And so it becomes very, very efficient. And that can either be done as a standalone, just sort of needs analysis, or that can then customize and build the course that a person then goes through based on how they performed.
Yeah, it makes me think of an example. One time we did a course on hand washing and hand hygiene in a medical environment, and how, the different, depending on who the learner is within an environment, within a health system environment, they need maybe more advanced learning, or maybe they have already learned it. And then you have everybody from people who work in the kitchen or work in maintenance or work, actually in a clinical position, and how, the learning may vary and adapt based on that pre-existing knowledge and on maybe even on their position and what they need to know.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Additionally, too, Luke, in a system like ours, when you build something like that hand washing course or skill set, what you can then do is you can then, like, let's just say, I don't know, food service, right? It's like there are a lot of other skills that food service employees need. You could build a food service training course, and then you take that hand washing and you drop that in as well. And it's like, okay, and then you can multi-purpose that. You can then, hey, we need it over here also for people who do X or Y. We'll drop it into that as well.
Yeah, so you're really kind of disconnecting the learning elements so that they can exist over multiple types of course bundles.
Exactly. Or you just throw it in, you say, hey, we just want a refresher, and if people can easily test out of this, right? The other thing too, we're collecting, part of what makes Fulcrum, the reason I work here is I love learner choice, and that's something very powerful for me just as a learner, and that's something I gravitated towards, and being able to offer that to people is something very powerful. And studies have shown that even on sort of boring material, when you give people choice, people will engage longer.
Well, I love, Craig, that the adaptive learning can really lead toward the confidence to make people more proficient in their job, also build engagement and even retention, to your earlier point about keeping people on the job. And then conversely, the fact that adaptive learning can help shape the training. I think it sounds like a win-win.
That's what we found. And, I'll say this too. Luke asked about value propositions. I got to say, some of the value propositions we learn end up coming from our partners. They find once they really understand how the tool works, they're constantly coming to us, showing us new ways that they want to use the tools.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the beauty of AI is that, the more the system gets used, the more the system's going to improve and add more value as it learns and adapts.
Exactly. And to my other point on that learner choice is when you're able to give people choice, you not only provide them with these opportunities to let things play out the way they want them to, but you're also able to collect more data. For example, on that, when people would get an answer incorrect, we used to just show them a hint, right? Something that would move them towards understanding on their own what the correct answer was, not giving them the answer. And what we realized was, let's not do that, because not everyone just wants that hint. Let's do like a great tutor, right? Where they say, do you want a hint? And they're allowed the opportunity to use that or not. And by doing that, we did two things. One is we empowered people with more choice. The other thing we did is we were then able to, because when we just showed it, we didn't know who was taking advantage of it. Now we know who's taking advantage of it. And when we look at who's using the hints and who's not, if the people using the hints are not doing better, then the hints aren't effective. So it gives us some idea of how to make those hints more effective, or that we need to.
That's great. I think we've done a good job of covering different applications of adaptive learning and looking at it both at an enterprise level and at a learning experience level and at an instructional design level. So, to wrap us up, Craig, talk about what's next with adaptive learning. Is there a 4.0 in the future?
Hey, Luke, I think it's just going to keep going. As you probably guessed, it's just going to keep going. And with some of our current partners, we are in adaptive 4.0. And what adaptive 4.0 gets you, it's everything that adaptive 3.0. Plus, what we're doing is we're taking external performance data, and that could be, let's just say there was a certification test after, or people, they were measuring something in the workplace. What we can then do is we can overlay that with the data in the platform, and we can do two things. We can make the training more effective, right? We can just that much more granular and effective. The other thing we can do is we can make even greater predictions. Where we are, what people find the most useful right now is the platform is able to predict people who are going to actually apply those skills back on the job before they go back on the job, right? And that's something that our employers have found very valuable. And the platform allows a lot of customization. For example, you could set the platform to encourage some level of self-remediation, or you can make that self-remediation mandatory. There's a lot of customization in it. What 4.0 will really allow people to do is make even more predictions, right? Make correlations. We're all about sort of actionable data. When we build our dashboards, there's a lot more that we could put in there than we do. But what we put in there is for the general customer, right? The things that are going to be very actionable, so we don't overwhelm them.
Yeah, boy, you got my mind going for sure. I can start to, I can think of so many applications across so many DaVinci clients and newer approaches that they can take. So thank you so much for joining us, Craig.
Yeah,
thank
Craig.
you. Yeah, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Luke. It was a great conversation. You asked a lot of really intelligent questions, and I think your audience will really be rewarded.
Thanks for taking time to talk with us today, Craig.
You're welcome.
Luke, Craig did a great job of breaking down some of the perceived barriers to adaptive learning and showing how it can benefit both the learner and the trainer. What were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, that was a great discussion. He certainly helps us think about adaptive learning in different ways. He started with defining adaptive learning. He defined it as having the training adjust to the individual learners and thinking of it like a high-tech version of one-on-one coaching. Adaptive learning should challenge each learner just above their current competency, striving for mastery and boosting confidence in the learner. He also said that adaptive learning doesn't live in a vacuum, but is part of a lot of training trends: competency-based learning, microlearning, personalized learning, and then, of course, using data analytics, and AI. He talked about how adaptive learning could be applied to onboarding and bring even more value in a high turnover environment. Craig also pointed out that we sometimes punish learners by putting them through training that they don't need. With adaptive learning, we give them the ability to test out and save time, while on the other hand, if someone needs more training, they get more. He also talked about the evolution of adaptive learning, starting with version 1.0, providing learning pathways, going up to 2.0, adjusting levels based on system algorithms, and then 3.0, where the learning adapts based on learner inputs and also on analyzing and optimizing content by applying artificial intelligence. He also talked about the impact on instructional design. He said instructional designers should still be able to use their favorite tools to develop learning experiences. They just need to think more in terms of microlearning, like developing microlearning objects rather than developing whole courses. That way, the learning platform can personalize the learning versus forcing every user to go through a whole course. Two other takeaways stuck out from Craig. First, he recommended if you're new to adaptive learning, you may want to start with a pilot and have that pilot just have a small, defined number of learning objectives that need to be delivered to a relatively large number of learners. And the final takeaway was what's next in adaptive learning. Seems like version 4.0 can extend across the boundaries of an organization and take advantage of intelligence and analysis gathered from multiple organizations in an industry to have an impact that's even on a greater scale. So really, it was just a great conversation with Craig.
Thanks, Luke. And many thanks to Craig Joyner of Fulcrum Labs for joining us today. If you have any questions about what we talked about, you can reach out to us on DaVinci's social channels, through our website, davinci.com, or by emailing us at poweredbylearning@davinci.com.
Powered by Learning is brought to you by DaVinci Interactive. For more than 25 years, DaVinci has provided custom learning solutions to government agencies, corporations, medical education and certification organizations, and educational content providers. We collaborate with our clients to bring order and clarity to content and technology. Learn more at davinci.com.